today our keynote speaker is Olu Brown, and he is from the North Georgia Annual Conference, and he has been a part of a very exciting church start called Impact UMC. That church is meeting right now in a middle school. They have about 1,200 people that are in attendance in a very short period of time. This has all taken place. They have about 400 people that are connected to them in an online community. And they have more than 400 people that are active in small groups for the purpose of discipleship. All this happened, a lot of this happened in a very short period of time. Olu's book is 0 to 80. Innovative Ideas for Planting and Accelerating Church Growth. And here's why I think this is a great book. It's written in axioms. So the principles that have guided them in doing what they're doing, they have put in very short form, about a page at a time, these axioms. And it's not just written by Olu, it's written by his team. And you'll see a picture of that team in the beginning. And I find it to be a book that's very accessible. The ideas, I think, will have great application in churches of any size. I know we're going to be looking at it here. We've got some staff members that are reading it now. And I am just so pleased to welcome him to our Bi-District Training Day. Olu, come and share with us your wisdom.
Thank you.
And you know what? Let's not forget to have a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads, shall we? Dear Lord, we want to pray at this time for Olu and all that he'll share. We are a church in need of encouragement and need of hearing some good news. And we believe that there is much good news to share if we will only have ears to hear and eyes to see. We know that the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church, is doing things in concert with your Holy Spirit, that we're still a part of the salvific work of leading people to Christ and of sharing the good news with those in need of compassion and justice. We ask you, Lord, to bless him at this time to help us hear things that would apply to our own context, bits of wisdom that we might be able to use that would guide us. And all this I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. How's everybody doing? Awesome, awesome. It is an awesome pleasure to be able to be here with you today. I'm not by myself. Andre Borns, who is back with us, he will be doing an awesome workshop, 2 workshops related to social media, technology, and all of that great stuff. You're going to hear wonderful workshops today, and some of the things that I'm going to talk about are paradigm shifts, overarching paradigm shifts that I'm seeing happen in the local church and in the denominational level, not only for the UMC, but literally across the universal church, not only here in the U.S., but across the world. And I think if we can be engaged with these, we will be okay and be able to be a part of the new movement and the new tidal wave of blessings that God is ushering in. I'm so grateful for Herb and all of his hospitality, and for these wonderful 2 districts that are here today, Alexandria and Arlington. Thank you so much. And Tom, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And to the wonderful folks here at Florist, would you give them a hand clap of praise? Well, we can switch to the presentation slide. And I want to tell you a little bit about the church that I'm a part of and that Andre is a part of. And then we're going to get into some nuts and bolt pieces about what's happening, we think, literally across the country. But before we do that, celebrate. Now, before we celebrate, let me tell you why we're celebrating. You just made it through a long, hard year, 2012, in your local congregations. It was an election year, it was general conference year, jurisdictional year, and annual conference put all together. You paid all of your apportionments, or as much as you could pay. You made it through a wonderful 2012 year. And so often when you come to events like this, it's always sometimes about what you could be doing better, what you're not doing. But what would happen if you just took a moment to give yourself a hand clap of praise for making it through a wonderful 2012? Would you celebrate? Awesome. And that's important. I think that's something we don't do enough of, but celebration is very important. I'm originally from Texas, a small town in Texas called Lufkin, Texas, about 40,000 people. And I grew up in an interesting environment. My mother and father separated when I was an infant. I was the youngest of 3, and my father, an ordained pastor, who then moved from where they were living in Chicago when I was coming along to Newark, New Jersey. And he spent his whole ministry in the Presbyterian church. And so we lived as a family in Texas with my mom and two older siblings, and my father lived in Newark, New Jersey. And we weren't Presbyterian in Texas, we were actually Baptist. So 9 months out of the year, we went to a Baptist church, and then when we visited him in Newark, New Jersey, guess what we were? We were Presbyterian. And then when we were teenagers, he moved cross country to Los Angeles, California. And so 3 months out of the year, we lived in LA, and he was a pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church. In the last few years of his life, he planted a new church. But something happened in that small town of Lufkin, Texas, when I was a teenager. There was a new church plant in our hometown. It wasn't a new Catholic, it wasn't a new Baptist, it wasn't any other denomination, except it was a United Methodist Church. And that church, Abundant Life United Methodist Church, when it came to our hometown community, it changed my life. One of my cousins came home and said, there's a new preacher in town who can sing. So we said, hey, we tried other churches, so, let's try this church. So we went to this church, and lo and behold, we fell in love with it. I was telling Pam earlier, I actually dress up more when I'm on the road and out than I do at home, because that church built my DNA, and it's much like our church today, very casual congregation. And so it was casual, everything went well, we loved it. And every fifth Sunday, like most churches, it was Youth Sunday. So I asked the pastor, I said, can I do the prayer? And he said, yeah, you can do the prayer. And so I went home that day after youth rehearsal, and I wrote out my altar prayer word for word, and I stood there in the midst of that congregation, that new church plant, and I prayed a prayer and went home, didn't think anything of it. A little bit later, as we were doing our Sunday afternoon ritual, eating, watching TV, chilling out, a car drives up in our driveway, and it's the pastor, and he says, hey, come take a ride with me, I want to talk with you. And on that ride, he gives me an opportunity of a lifetime. As a young 13, 14-year-old student, not at the Board of Ordained Ministry level, no bishop has laid hands on me, no DS has taken me through the candidacy process, no mentor, no SPRC, none of that stuff. But as a 13 or 14-year-old kid, that pastor saw something in me, and he gave me an opportunity, and that was to assist him on Sunday morning. And the rest is history. And so I stand here today as a young individual who was nurtured into the United Methodist Church because of a new church plant, accepted my call to ministry because of a United Methodist congregation, and now am helping to plant new United Methodist churches. And so I understand here in the Virginia Annual Conference there are new church plants. Any new church planters who are here, would you please stand up? Please stand up. Any new church planters or those who are part of a new church plant? Awesome, awesome. Let's give them a hand clap of praise. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do, not only for our new churches, but also our existing churches. You have no idea of the young people and older adults that you're impressing, and their lives will never be the same again. And so from our journey, I come to Atlanta, Georgia, go to seminary, work at a large United Methodist church for several years, but God puts it on my heart to plant a new church, and hence we plant Impact Church. And in the midst of planting that church, we said, we've got to put this story on paper. We got to talk about it. And this is where the book comes from, 0 to 80. Christy Latana, who is here, really take her workshop. You got a lot of wonderful workshop leaders, and Christy's going to be here. She's a part of the Baltimore, Washington Conference, and you'll see her name there at the bottom of the book as a contributor, just a wonderful individual who we love so much. And so the book came into being because we said we've got to talk about this journey, because what we're learning is there's really not much difference between a new church and an existing church. The principles of church health, the principles of church governance, the principles of policy, the principles of growth are the same for a new church as well as an existing church. There are just opportunities where existing churches get in trouble because they forget what they did when they first started. Some of you have churches where if you go to the fellowship hall, there are all of these pictures on the bottom layer and of a level of that church. And these pictures look old-timey because there are churches in Atlanta, the people may have on overalls and they may have a horse and buggy or some kind of thing out in that picture and we laugh at them, but what we forget is they started that church because of a passion. And the way to get back to your DNA, the way to get back to your growth, if you're an existing church, is you got to go back to those old pictures and find out why in the world did these folks risk everything to start this church to begin with. It's the same with relationships. You know, my wife and I are about to celebrate our 10th year of marriage, and I know there are those who have been married much longer. Please tell me how you do it, because I want to stay in this race as long as I can. But, you know, if things start getting weird, guess what I need to do? I go back to doing what I did to help her fall in love with me. It's the same thing with Church Grow. If things start getting weird, you go back to hospitality, you go back to missions, you go back to passion, and then you will see the health of the church continue to go forward. And so what is the vision of Impact Church? It is a multicultural gathering of people who are committed to sharing the love of Christ with the world. That is the mission. That is the vision. If I were to ask you to stand and tell the vision, or you can also use mission of your church, I wonder how many people could do it. If you have to go to a document that has dust on it, then it's an outdated vision. If you can't say that vision in one sentence, it's too long. Your vision of your local church, no matter how young or how old it is, should be a one-sentence deal that you can roll out of your mouth. And not only should the pastor know it, not only should the pastors know it, not only should your lay leaders know it, not only should your council know it, but guess what? The person who's sitting on your pew, or the person who's sitting somewhere running a ministry, helping out with a committee, guess what? They should be able to say and know the vision. A multicultural gathering of people who are committed to sharing the love of Christ with the world. So this is what it looks like for us on Sunday morning. We're in a middle school in the midst of downtown Atlanta, a little offshoot community. Tomorrow, the Seattle Seahawks and the Atlanta Falcons are going to be playing. And guess what? We're about 5 minutes from that game. So we're in that urban sector of Atlanta. And we worship in a middle school. Pray for us, because in October of this year, we are moving out of the middle school and we are moving into our own building. Hallelujah. Praise God. So I've got a quick video that I want to show you of where God is taking us, because I believe every church needs to have a future. If you don't have a future, there is no way you can hope and dream about the big things that God has in store for you. So this is where we'll be moving. A part of this will be phase 1, but the rest of it will happen in phase 2 and phase 3.
When we think of Impact Church, it is more than just a building. It's a place where lives can be changed. The opportunities are boundless. Can you imagine a space with adequate parking to accommodate all of our guests? And an open entrance with the information kiosk to answer the many questions that pop up each Sunday? And what about a cafe that will be a gathering place for connection groups during the week and a place for friends to meet up on Sundays? And this space also would have areas dedicated to families and children, starting with a secure registration station and including a stage for Next G's worship environment. For the teens and tweens, we could have a game room for weekends and after-school group sessions to keep our youth engaged. The opportunities are endless. And can you imagine an auditorium space that would house our weekly Sunday worship experience, but would also be flexible enough to be converted into a multi-use space for banquets, wedding receptions, and more? A space that could easily convert from an auditorium to an outdoor amphitheater for concerts and non-traditional worship experiences. The windows of opportunity are open to us right now, reminding us that Impact Church is definitely more than just a building.
And so that is where God is taking us in our local church. But the design of Impact is not just to build a building, but it is to build people and to help build community. We're in an urban sector, and I know there are people who are here who may be suburbs, who may be rural, who may be urban, but the diversity is there. But this is what we realize, that God is growing ministries wherever you happen to be. And so we are no longer living in a time where geography can limit the power of God. And really, it never should have limited the power of God. I think if there is anybody who ever limits the power of God, it's sitting in your seat. And so that's what this conversation is about. That's what this day is about. Yes, to celebrate last year, but also to look forward and see what God is doing this year. Here's a scripture focus that we're going to look at. It says, "Now unto God, who is able to do" what? exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask or think. Guess where that comes from? The Bible. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. And that's what we build this conversation on today. That God is able to do what? Exceedingly and what? Abundantly above all we can ask, think, or imagine. And that's what this thing is all about. But here is the choice that you've got to make and that I have to make when Andre and I leave today and we go back to Atlanta. Do we stay in the box or do we try to reach the world? Do we stay in the box or do we try to reach the world? Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that there are a million different reasons why we stay in the box. And there are a million valid different reasons of why the box is the best place for us to be. But I can also tell you that where God is pushing us is outside of the box and into the world. Now, here's where it becomes difficult. It's one thing for the church to say that we're going to get out of the box, but it's a whole nother thing for every layer of that church to say we're going to get out of the box. For the Sunday school and Christian education departments to say, all right, this year we're out of the box. For youth group to say, okay, we're out of the box. For small groups to say, okay, this year we're out of the box. For younger adults, older adults, for young people, all of those groups to say, look, this year we're out of the box. Because it becomes all of our responsibility to lead our ministries, our committees, our areas in a way that helps us reach the world and move out of the box. You know, some of you can complain and you can say, Bishop Cho, you sent us the wrong pastor. We can no longer use that excuse anymore. And then there are some pastors who can complain to the bishop and say, Bishop Cho, you sent me to the wrong church. We can no longer say that anymore because we all have the responsibility, not just the pastor, not just the leaders, but everybody at that church or in that local community has a responsibility of growing the ministry and moving the ministry out of the box. But here it is. It's your choice. It's my choice. It's our choice. And so we're going to talk about a few concepts that I believe are paradigm shifts in this 21st century ministry. But these are paradigm shifts because God is moving in these new and different directions. Now, as you go to your different workshops, there are people who are experts on these subjects who are going to drill deep and who are going to tell you much more than I can ever dream of telling you. So some of these will be umbrella approaches, but I believe as we write these down, as we text them, as we type them in, however you take notes, I believe these are some of the key areas where God is moving ministry growth, no matter where you happen to be geographically. Here is something that I like from a guy named Peter Senge. His book is The Fifth Discipline, and he talks about a learning organization. He says, a learning organization is an organization that is continually expanding its capacity to create its future. But for a learning organization, adaptive learning must be joined by generative learning, learning that enhances our capacity to create. What would happen if we took that philosophy back to our districts, back to our annual conference, and back to our local churches, and back to our ministries? To say, look, we're going to be a learning church. We're always continually working to increase our capacity and therefore increase our future. We are no longer going to be an adaptive church. We're going to be a generative church. Now, to compare this to a corporate structure, an adaptive company is a company that has a suggestion box and it waits on the person who is using their services to write an email or to write it in ink and paper and place it in that suggestion box. They take it out of that suggestion box. They send it through 4 or 5 different teams of people, and after 2 or 3 years, they decide to do the suggestion that the customer asked for 2 years ago. And by that time, the customer doesn't even remember what the suggestion was, and worse than that, the person is no longer a customer anymore because they've moved on to another company that responds to their needs a lot faster. Think about the local churches. How many of us have these suggestion boxes, and they're great? And people will write a suggestion down, but it goes to the wrong group, it goes to the wrong area, and by the time we choose to address it, we don't see that person sitting out there anymore. Why? Because we were too slow in our response. That's an adaptive organization. That's an adaptive church. A generative organization or a generative church creates something for a customer even before they know they need it. And that's a whole different platform. That's a whole different kind of admin board meeting. That's a whole different kind of church council meeting where we come and say, what are the folks we're trying to reach? What will they need in the next 5 years? That's a whole different kind of platform. I was waiting on worship, and one of our music team members has a saxophone, and I noticed that he had a phone, and the phone was on a stand like this, and he had a saxophone to that phone, and what he was doing was using an app on that phone to tune his instrument. That's a generative company that makes something long before a customer knows they need it. And so that's going to be key for us. Here is an example of a generative company. This is Apple. Raise your hand if you have an iPhone. It doesn't even have to be a 5, all right? Raise your hand if you have an iPad, all right? Raise your hand if you have any kind of a Mac computer. Good stuff. All right. So let's talk about Apple, not 2013, but let's talk about Apple 1983. One of the most difficult stages in the development of a young entrepreneurial firm like Apple comes when it tries to repeat its initial success with a new product. Companies in fields as diverse as cars and calculators have stumbled and lost the market they once dominated. Lisa and Macintosh will determine whether Apple joins those failures or remains among the leaders of the computer industry. That was a question that was raised by Fortune magazine in 1983. This is Apple today. Now, Steve Jobs is gone, but look at what Apple has now: a phone, a computer, and an iPad. In 1983, people wondered, would they make it? Now, I know we don't talk like this in church culture, but this is what the world is wondering about you. Is your church going to make it? And this is what the world is wondering about our denomination. Are we going to make it? Because since 1968, guess what? We have not been going up. We have been doing what? We've been going in decline. And the world wants to know, are we going to exist 20 years from now? Because if they're studying computer companies like this, they're also studying religious organizations as well. But friends, it's not going to happen just because we pray a lot. It's not going to happen just because we build wonderful buildings. It's not going to happen just because we have wonderful leaders and wonderful lay people. It doesn't happen just because. It happens because we design it. It happens because we push for it. It happens because we come to things like this on this weekend. And there are a ton of other things that you could be doing, but you're going to take this stuff back and you're going to push it through with your leaders and you're going to push it through with your congregation. And you're going to say, look, the reason this is important is because we may not be here 20 years from now. The reason this is important is because the world is wondering, do we have what it takes to move from where we are to where God would have us to be? And so that's what it's all about. And the choice is up to us. So let's talk more specifically about some of these key areas that are important to the life of the United Methodist Church, but not only the United Methodist Church, but to the life of the church as a whole. Here's the first principle and first concept, and hope you take this down. It's membership versus relationship. Say that with me. Membership. All right. So here is where we draw the line in the sand. As a denomination, I believe we are more concerned about membership than we are about relationship. And I clearly understand that because from a bottom line perspective, you do your year-end report, you better have some membership, right, to put down there. Because that is one of the distinctions to where it helps us to tell if we're growing or not. That's great. But I think we have it backwards. I think if we go after relationship first, then the membership will go out of the roof. But many of our local churches are going after name on the roll, membership first, and then we're suffering in the relationship area. But I believe if we're going to be a part of this new paradigm shift in this new century, we've got to be more focused on relationship as opposed to membership. And so what does it look like? It looks like the ministry that you're already doing in your local churches. If I were to ask you, tell me the name of the school principal or all of the names of the schools that are less than 5 miles from your local congregation. A good majority of you would be able to stand up and say, this is the name of the principal, these are the names of the teachers. You could do that. That's relationship building. If I were to ask some of you who live next to a retail district, tell me the names of the managers in those local stores. You can stand up and say, these are the names of the managers in those local stores, because you're interested in relationship building. If I could ask you, tell me the name of your local politicians, you could do that because you're interested in relationship building. What's interesting about generations of people who are living today is they are concerned about building a relationship with you first. And if you do that well, then membership is just a formality. I reach people all the time who come up and say, hey, you're my pastor. But if we go back and look at the roll, they're not on there. Why? Because we're in relationship first. And then when we take them to the next level, which is membership, that's just a formality. But if I started out with membership, come take this class 101, sit here for 6 weeks, sign up, and then you can have coffee with me and we'll learn how to be better Christians in the by and by, then by that time they're gone. Because what they're craving wasn't membership, but what they were craving was relationship. And this is the difference. So membership is really all about a name on the roll. It's static, it's process, and it's church statistics. And why is relationship important? Because relationship focuses on attendance commitment. That is dynamic. It's in person and it's online. Some of you who are here who are church leaders, you've been fighting video in the church, you've been fighting graphics like this in the church, and you've been fighting online in the church. Stop it. You're hurting your discipleship. If you don't do anything today, go home and get your church online. I was talking to a young guy who was in Atlanta earlier this week who said he was working in Scotland, and he said our online ministry helped him get through that work assignment. That's discipleship. You would never imagine the people you would reach if you move outside of your walls and pump what you're doing literally to the World Wide Web. And then finally, relationship also builds church health, and that's key. So first, we're looking at membership versus relationship. Another big piece is hospitality, but not any kind of hospitality, extreme hospitality. Say that with me. Extreme hospitality. Now, I know this stuff doesn't make sense because some are saying, oh, Lou, I get that, I do that. But what is different about this? This is what's different about extreme hospitality. All people are welcome, all people are worthy, and all people have a place. All people are welcome, all people are worthy, and all people have a place. Now, it's one thing for you to know that, but it's another thing for your scout leader to know that. It's one thing for you to know that, but it's another thing for your choir director to know that. It's one thing for you to know that, but it's another thing for your usher team leader to know that. It's one thing for you to know it, but it's a whole nother thing for your SPRC or your trustee for them to know it. Because when they were elected and approved as a trustee and they read the discipline word for word, they were told to protect and serve by any means necessary. And you live across the street, or your church is across the street from some wonderful residential apartments, and there is a vast number of young kids and teenagers who from 3 o'clock after school lets out to 6 o'clock are home by themselves because their parents are working and they've got a wonderful 3-hour gap. And lo and behold, your church has this beautiful gymnasium that is awesome and that is wonderful. But your trustees were taught to protect and serve at any cost. and you begin having these wonderful conversations about opening up your gymnasium that hadn't been open in the last month to some kids who live across the street, and you can be in ministry to them, but then the finance team comes in and they start crunching the numbers of what it's going to cost to replace a basketball rim or two, what it's going to cost to put new paint on the wall when some kid flings a ball against the wall, and you look at the bottom line, and your bottom line begins to drive the ministry, and before you know it, you don't have a missions anymore because you allowed the bottom line to drive the vision that God had given you. And so now those kids go on, and you've got a wonderful opportunity for them, and they can't access it. But if you began the meeting with this, all are welcome, all are worthy, all have a place, the numbers that come out on that Excel spreadsheet won't matter as much because the ministry will matter more than the bottom line. And so that's what extreme hospitality is all about. I didn't realize it, but as a pastor in our church, how important it is for everybody in our church to understand that we practice extreme hospitality. You know, we had a situation not too long ago to where we were offering our small groups. And it's interesting now because as people sign up for small groups, you may have two last names. And we noticed these two last names were both women. And so when we made calls to this family to say, hey, are you coming to the small group? And you're not sure because there are two names of women. You raise a question, is this person your daughter? Are you the mom? And they say, no, that's my wife. And because that small group leader doesn't understand extreme hospitality, a damage occurs. And that person no longer feels welcome. Now, you may disapprove of homosexuality or you may not. That's secondary to hospitality. Because if we literally believe that all people have a place, then that means when you start doing small groups, can same-sex couples come? That means when you build beautiful buildings and you have baptism experiences and two fathers want to have a child baptized, will you baptize that child? That means when you start youth group and there's this family that comes and that family doesn't look like a traditional family, is that kid going to be welcome? See, it's one thing to say extreme hospitality from the pulpit. It's one thing to say it from your leadership team. But when it comes to each and every one of us, some of us can block God's grace far more quickly than any pastor, any district superintendent, or any church leader ever can. And so when we talk about extreme hospitality, does the whole church know it? And do we practice it together? Because at the end of the day, if we follow the Great Commission, what is the Great Commission? Go ye for, therefore, that's King James, into what? Some of the world? Virginia? All of the world. And then here's what a seminary professor told us. If you believe in the Great Commission, and if the Great Commission works, then guess what happens? The whole world shows up. Is your church ready for the world really showing up? Or is the Great Commission just lip service and you want certain people to show up? Because if you really preach it and you teach it, then guess what happens? The whole world is going to show up. And they want to know, do you really mean the Great Commission? Or did you just mean it for a certain net worth of people? Did you just really mean it for a certain type of educated people? Did you just mean it for a certain ethnicity? Did you just mean it for a certain type of family? They want to know, if I show up, will you accept me? Which leads us to this, the Ritz-Carlton principle. We meet people where they are. That's what hospitality is all about. It's about customer service. Even if I disagree with your lifestyle, I'll never have an opportunity to minister to you about a lifestyle or about a choice if I don't welcome you first. Because people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. And sometimes our ministries are set up to push people out first, and then we want to disciple them second. No, we've got to welcome people first, and then we disciple them. But if our ministries never allow people to come in, we never have an opportunity to talk to them about Jesus Christ. But everybody in the ministry has to be committed to hospitality, meeting people where they are and discipling them to where they need to be. How many of you love Golden Corral? Any Golden Corral lovers? Any All right. Awesome. I love Golden Corral because Golden Corral is an awesome place. My wife doesn't like it. I can only go to Golden Corral when I'm eating by myself. But Golden Corral has what I call the scout concept. All right. So imagine a high school Friday night football game. 2 or 3 busloads of kids. They stop at a Golden Corral parking lot, and everybody can get off the bus, just the coach or the manager. They go inside and they work some marvelous deal with the manager of Golden Corral. One of 2 things will happen. They will come out, get back on the bus, and keep going to another restaurant. Or they will come out, they will wave to the bus, and a whole busload of folks will get off, and they will go in there and have ice cream and buffet, and they'll have a wonderful opportunity. Many of our churches are not seeing the busload, we're seeing the scout. Many of your ministries are not seeing the busload, you're meeting the scout. And if you do right by the scout, they'll come back out and wave the buses to come. Here's how I know. Here's an email I received from a guy. Pastor Olu, I'm so glad my wife and I decided to visit Impact this past Sunday. We've been looking for the type of atmosphere Impact has for quite some time. For the first time in a long while, I'm excited to get back involved in church. I feel after your experience, our experience on Sunday, that I can bring my entire family and we all can be nurtured and grow in the Word. So I look forward to what God has in store as we continue to develop our relationship with Him through Impact. So the first person we met was not the whole family. The first person we met was the scout. And the scout said, because I felt welcome, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and reach the rest of my family. Andy Stanley would say, you don't have a volunteer problem, you have a systems problem. I would say, you don't have an attendance problem, you don't have a volunteer problem, we've got a hospitality problem. And many of us lose tons of people because we refuse to offer extreme hospitality. Here's one key example. Many of us have greeters and ushers at our front doors or along the way when people come in. And we know because this greeter has been the wrong greeter for the last 20 years. But because this greeter is either a church officer, because this greeter is either one of your biggest givers, then we tell that person, look, you stay here, when we don't know how many people we're losing because they never smile, they never hug, they never greet, but they want to greet every week, and we're losing people. Think about it. Hospitality is not just person to person. Hospitality is also physical plant. There are some of our churches that have child care areas with 1942 child care equipment. And we can't understand why no new mothers and new fathers won't bring their little babies to these nice child care areas in the literal bottom molded part of the church. And I don't understand why people don't bring their child here. That's because that same mother lives in 2013 and from her work computer can log on to the child care center and see her baby asleep. And she refuses to let her child stay with you for an hour and a half in a 1942 decorated child care center. There are people who work in buildings and who work in atmospheres to where if they walk into the restroom at 2:50 p.m. on Monday and a toilet is broken, by 5 p.m. on Monday, the toilet is fixed. And they've been coming to your church for the last year, and that one restroom has been out of service for the whole year. They don't get it. There are people who work in places to where the lawn is manicured to a ½ inch, and they don't understand why your church building still looks like Gotham City. And see, all of that's hospitality. So here you are, you got a couple of greeters who are at the door, and they decide they want to talk a little bit more about the playoff NFL football game, and it's rainy and it's cloudy like this, and they miss a lady who drives in, and she has a set of twins, and they miss her because they're talking about football. And she's lugging with this hand, and she's lugging with that hand, and they got umbrellas sitting around them, but they're talking about who's going to win the football game, and all of a sudden she gets halfway to your front door, and she says, I quit. I can go home and watch Joel Osteen. And she packs up the kids and she goes off. And the pastor and the choir think that they missed that woman because they had a bad sermon or a bad song. No, you missed them because you failed to offer hospitality in the parking lot. So hospitality is not just about people and relationships. Hospitality is also about physical plant, bricks and mortar, systems. You've got a wonderful volunteer who loves Jesus, but they're just terrible in following up with people. So you poured your heart out about a new volunteer opportunity, and you said, we want everybody to sign up, and you saw everybody sign up, but that person took that sign-up list, put it in their briefcase, their pocketbook, and here comes next Sunday, and guess where it still is? You don't have a volunteer problem. You've got a problem called somebody didn't make a call to say, hey, we saw you signed up. And so a week goes by and the pastor or the leader says, hey, I thought you signed up for this new ministry. And they say, I did sign up for the new ministry, but nobody called me. And that was your one shot. And they're never going to sign up again. And you've lost that opportunity. Competition, let's talk about that. So we live in a world and we live in a society where people don't think the church is facing competition anymore. But if there is any organization that is facing competition like anything, it is the local church. Here are some of the things that you're competing with on Sunday morning, Wednesday night, Saturday. These are all of the things that you're competing with. And if we don't realize that we're involved in competition, then we're going to lose out. Friends, you're not in competition against the Baptist church. You're in competition against Lowe's. You are not in competition against the Presbyterians. You're in competition against Home Depot. We are not in competition against the Catholic Church. We are in competition against Starbucks. And unless we see it and take it seriously, we'll never be able to do the things that God is calling us to do. Here is a company called Walmart. In 2010, their sales were $422 billion. How much did they spend on advertising in America only? Notice this is domestic spending. How much did they spend? $2.1 billion. What is your church's advertising budget? The largest company in the world, everybody knows them, in 2010 spent $2.1 billion to advertise something everybody already knows just in America. What is our advertising budget? And how seriously do we take the things that God is calling us to do and spreading those to the whole wide world? So we've got these two wonderful pizza companies. We've got Pizza Hut and we've got Domino's Pizza. Now, I grew up in a time where there were a lot of Pizza Huts where you can go in and you can sit down in them and get this huge red cup and get this huge pitcher of soda, and you thought you were just awesome, and you would put all the cheese on there and all the little pepper stuff. How many of you remember those kind of sit-downs? All right, good stuff. Now, how many of you have seen a sit-down Pizza Hut lately? Not many. They're slowly coming back, but they've died. And the reason they died was because of this company called Domino's, who changed the paradigm. They said there are people who want their stuff at home and will deliver. And so the whole sit-down Pizza Huts were literally wiped off the face of the earth. Why? Because the competition shifted. And is that true of many of our churches? When the competition shifts from underneath you, do you have to wait 3 months for a board meeting to change? Or can you meet in Starbucks? Can you meet in somebody's home and say, look, y'all, God's moving in a different way, and I don't have until 4 years in general conference runs around. I don't have to wait until annual conference. We've got to be leaders in our local church, and we've got to make a shift. We'll explain it to the DS later. We'll explain it to the bishop later, and hopefully they get it. But if they don't, these are some people we need to minister to, and God is calling us not yesterday, but God is calling us today. And that's where ministry is in 2013, is right now ministry. It's not in the by and by when the morning comes. So that's competition. Let's hurry on and talk about giving. Now, you've got to ask yourself, is it deficit or strategy? Is it deficit or strategy? Now, what I'm about to show you is going to send me to hell for many of you, but I got to show this to you because I think it will change your financial income in your local church. Friends, we are not living in a deficit in God. We may have avoided a fiscal cliff temporarily, but that is the United States Treasury. And I do not compare the United States Treasury to the one who flung the stars in the sky. I do not compare the United States Treasury to the one who bowls the mountains out of the water. I don't do it because the last time I checked, God was not broken and God was not broke. So when you leave here today, stop going home, in particular those of you on finance saying we're in a deficit, we can't afford it, we can't do it. No, it's strategy. What is your strategy in order to see the great financial benefits that God would have for each and every one of us? And for those who are seeing great financial benefits, here are some of the things we're seeing in Atlanta, Georgia, to where you can see even more. And this is it, kiosk. Kiosk. Now, this is where many of you send me to hell. Now, here is the lie that we've been telling. Here is the big lie. Don't offend the older adults because they have all the money. And if you offend the older adults, then the church is going to die because there's no money. That's a lie. There are young people with more money than you will ever imagine. But guess what? What is the format that most of our churches have to receive money? Cash and what? Check. Now, if you ask me how much cash I have in my pocket right now, I have zero. If you ask me the last time I wrote a check, I can't remember the last time. But if you go to my debit card, there'll be a little bit of money there. Not much. It'll be a little bit. So here's what's happening in our local churches. Our format is only cash and check. And so guess what generations have cash and check? Older adult generations or older generations. And there are tons of young people who come to your church either in-house or online who want to give, who want to participate, but they can't do it. So here's something that we've instituted in the life of our church. We've invested in these kiosks. Now there are some that are more prettier than this, but we set these kiosks up, and what it allows people to do is to use their debit card or their credit card, and they're able to give. Their debit card or their credit card, and they're able to give. So here are two quick theological things. Olu, are y'all going to put it in the front? Heck yes, we're going to put it in the front. We want that to be the first thing you see. Friends, they're putting ATM machines in parking lots now. No retail chain, no bank hides the ATM machine. So theologically, you can find it in the Bible. I don't know, I don't care, but we're not going to hide it. Here is the second thing. Well, Olu, what if somebody gives so much that they go in debt by giving to the church? Raise your hand if you've seen somebody in the last year go into debt by giving to the church. Now, I can raise your hand for Macy's. I can raise your hand for JCPenney's. I can raise your hand for a bunch of other credit cards, but you wouldn't raise your hand one time. If somebody gave us $10,000 on American Express, our finance person would call and say, are you sure that's what you meant to do? They'll say, no, we'll reverse that, and we go on to glory. But we did get something. So what we've done is install these kiosks that allow people to give via debit and check. But not only that, online, we also have opportunity for people to give online. And what we've seen is a direct increase in financial giving. Because this is the way it works. On tomorrow at our church, there are going to be people who come to our church, and if the only system we had was cash or check, and we passed the offering buckets, and they had $5 worth of cash in their pocket, guess what they would give? $5. That same person would go less than 5 miles down the street to the Falcons Seahawks game, and by the time they sit in the chair, they've already spent $100. Already. But what did they give to the church? So the issue wasn't that they didn't have it. The issue was that the church could not access it. So this is why these are important. This kiosk right here cost us in the neighborhood of $2,500, all right? Now, we have a church like everybody else. We can't afford it. So guess what I did? I had a breakfast meeting with a donor, and I said, look, this is a vision. This is what we want to do. He wrote a $2,500 check, and we got it, donated. We said we want a second one. We found the money, and we got it. And this is why it's important. Those two kiosks in 2012 brought in $295,000. Now, I don't know what your church's budget is, but wouldn't you like to add that to it? Two kiosks brought in $295,000, and online giving over $300,000. So if we look at our percentage breakdown in giving, 31% of our giving now is electronic. 69% is cash and check. You see what's happening in our world now? You don't have a deficit problem, you have a systems problem. And people want to give, you just don't have a way for them to access the portal to give. So, and because finance people are very gifted and they'll start talking about merchant accounts and cost and all of that good stuff, well, guess what, friends? The bank charges you money to count your cash. The bank charges you for everything. So if we were to break down the merchant fees, those merchant fees would be nowhere near the $295,000, and I'd rather have $10,000 worth of merchant fees at the end of the year and still have that. And so, where's the next step of where God is taking us? This is what we're about to install next: iPad giving stations, to where individuals can come into the life of the church and they can use the iPad and they can swipe. And here's what we're finding: many generations are using these. I have a picture of a woman who's in her 70s who goes to our church, who uses that kiosk every Sunday. But we've got to think about how we give and how we encourage people to give and how we move them forward in the faith. Let's talk about this: revising structure. And this is the last piece we're going to talk about, and we'll get ready to go into our break and then our small groups. So we talk about competition, we talk about hospitality, we talk about giving, but here I think is one of the most important things that I can ever share to you, and was one of the reasons why we planted Impact Church. We believe in the United Methodist Church, but we also believe that part of the reason why the church isn't growing is because we need to revise the structure of the church. It has become, we believe, overly bureaucratic. The Book of Discipline is a wonderful document, but there are times when the Book of Discipline can actually slow down church growth and can prevent ministry from happening. And so how is it that we found an Impact in Atlanta, Georgia, in order to honor the discipline, but yet go forward in ministry and missions? And this is a big part of our book, 0 to 80, and Coach Berry has it, and hope you invest in it. So here is the structure of our leadership team. You may call it your church council. You may call it your admin board. So here is a common order and structure of most of our local churches. There's an administrative area. There are volunteers or staff, or you may have both. There are committees, your officers, members, your congregation. And the hope is we all love Jesus together, and we do vision and service, and we go on. But that oftentimes is not what happens. This is what happens. The administrative wing develops inertia because this wonderful volunteer or wonderful staff person can't wait 3 months to the next trustee board meeting to get approval for $10 worth of paper clips. And they don't understand that, because all somebody has to do is go down the street and get paper clips or fix the copy machine. And why do we have to wait this long time? And what happens is they get stuck. And if they're really gifted, you lose them. They don't stick around because they can go and serve somewhere else and get stuff done a lot faster. The committees develop control. It's about them. It's about their group. It's about what they say. It's about what they don't say. And members then move from mission focus to maintenance focus. That's when you start having church meetings about colors of carpet. That's when you have church meetings about copy machines. That's when you start having church meetings about paint on the wall instead of sending people to Haiti. I was talking to a woman this morning at the hotel who was on her way to the Sudan for the Presbyterian church. We prayed for her. You're not talking about those kind of things anymore, because you're talking about maintenance, nuts and bolts issues, not the mission of the church. And so we looked at that and said, how is it that we can honor the discipline, honor the lay teams, but move the church forward? And this is what we've developed at Impact Church, and this is in the book as well. At the very core is our vision. Right above that are our leaders. These are both lay people, clergy, and staff, and volunteers. Their role is innovation, influence, coaching, and execution. To the bottom right are impactors. Many churches would call them members, but their job is ownership and ministry. Those folks should never have to come to a meeting about a copy machine. They should never have to come to a meeting about paper clips. Their job is to be on the mission field. Our leaders have made those decisions. Our staff and our key volunteers are making those decisions. Your job is to be out in the mission field. And to the bottom left is where we spend our last bit of time, because I think this is where we really get stuck. And this is the leadership team, the church council, or admin board, as some of your churches would call it. What is their job? Governance, policy, wisdom, and guidance. So when we met with our district superintendent, we said, we love the church, but the structure of the church can hold us back. He said, I want you to have the 5 committees. We said, okay. So we've got SPRC, we have finance, we have trustees, we have lay leadership, and we also have nominations. So we have those. But if you look at the book of discipline, it gives you allowances for each of those teams, 6 to 9, so forth and so on. And what we realize, part of what's holding back our structure is that many of us have too many people around our leadership tables. And so we said, okay, we'll have those 5 teams, but we'll only have 3 representatives on each of those teams. So we have 3 finance members, we have 3 SPRC members, we have 3 trustees. So 3 plus 5 is what? 15. In addition to that, we also said we have key staff persons, and we want them to be a part of that team as well. And so we added an additional 6. So 15 plus 6 is what? 21. Now, from working with nonprofits, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of nonprofits make is that staff will have voice but no vote. And you have these wonderful board members who live around the world. The Friday before the Saturday meeting, you send them a stack of paper this tall, and you believe that on a 2-hour plane ride, they're going to read all of that information, and you give them so much authority, you give them so much power, and you sit them down in a room, and the staff who know the organization, who love the organization, are sitting on the back, and they've got voice but no vote, and you entrust the vote to people who hadn't read the material, don't necessarily care about the organization, may have given a big donation, so you put them on the team, and the very people who know about the organization don't have any vote at all. So all 21 of those individuals have both voice and vote. So that was the first year of that operating model. As we're in 2013, what we did with the lay side of that team, those 15 individuals, we've said only your lead person will be represented at the leadership team table. So only your lead finance person, only your lead trustee. So now we've gone from 21 people now to 11 people. And part of the journey is lowering the number of people who are around the table making decisions. What's the largest company in the world? It's Walmart. When you leave here today, Google Walmart's board. Walmart, the largest company in the world, has fewer board members than many of our local churches. Delta Airlines, I met with one of their board members recently who lives in Atlanta. Guess how many board members Delta Airlines has? 12. That's it. And so we figured if some of the largest corporations in the world can run successfully with fewer people, so can we. And here is the final responsibility of that group. Their job is governance only. Their job is policy only. Their job is wisdom only. And their job is guidance only. If when Andre and I left here today and we go and we get ready to board Delta Airlines and we see the CEO lugging on luggage, then it doesn't matter what the change flight cost is. We're going with another airline because their system is broken. If we get to the ticket counter and their CFO is taking my ticket, I'm going to AirTran, and if that costs $2,000 to get back to Atlanta, we're going to do it because it means their system is broken. And what happens in the local United Methodist churches is oftentimes we're not sure who the leader is, and we're not sure what authority they have, and we just recycle and we circle, and ultimately the mission and the vision of the church suffers. This church council, this admin board, this leadership team, their role only is governance, policy, wisdom, and guidance. And so ultimately, this is what it looks like for us. One person from SPRC, one person from nominations, one from trustees, one from lay leadership, and one from finance, along with our 6 executive staff team members. We come together and we form the leadership team level of the church, and we move the vision of the church and the maintenance of the church, and we ultimately release the people to do the missions of the church. So friends, the reason I ended with this, it doesn't matter what the competition is. It doesn't matter what your hospitality is. It doesn't matter what your marketing is. It doesn't matter any of those things we just talked about or some of the things that we'll talk about in our workshops. If you try to push this stuff through a very bureaucratic structure, it will never work. And so part of the hard work that each of you will have to do as you leave here, that we do in Atlanta, is revision, reimagine our local church structure. You're going to have to upset some people. You're going to have to let go some people. You're going to have to remove some people, but do it for the sake of the mission and the vision of the local church, to know that there are many more people out there who need to be in here than those who are already with you. And so that's what it's all about. And here's the last closing. fear-based ministry, or faith-based ministry. Here are some fear giants: status quo, geography, finances, structure, and bureaucracy. Martin Luther King said this: most people, churches I added, and Christians in particular, are thermometers that record or register the temperature of majority opinion, not thermostats that transform and regulate the temperature of society. Here's the decision you got to make. Will your local church be a thermometer or a thermostat? Will your local ministry be a thermometer or thermostat? Will your committee be a thermometer or a thermostat? And may I tell you, we've got too many thermometer churches. We have too many thermometer choirs. We have too many thermometer pastors. We have too many thermometer people in our denomination. We need some folks who will come into a cold room and make it hot. And we need some folks who will come into a hot room and make it cold. Are you a thermostat or a thermometer? And as you go through these small group exercises, that's what you got to ask yourself. And if you decide that you're a thermostat, whatever it takes, whatever you learn, you got to go back and drive it through. You got to pray it through. You got to work it through. You got to push it through, and you got to believe it through. Let's close with this prayer. It comes from Bruce Wilkerson's book, The Prayer of Jabez. Let's say this out loud. I am expected to attempt something large enough that failure is guaranteed unless God steps in. Let's say that one more time. I'm expected to attempt something large enough that failure is guaranteed unless God steps in. God bless you, and thank you for letting me share with you.